Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Today, I'm pleased to have with us Braxton Wood. He's the founder of Professional Pivots, an executive career consulting company that helps high-performing professionals take control and land their dream job on their own terms. Listeners, that sounds a lot like being in the driver's seat and owning your career. So you can see why I'm excited to talk to Braxton today. He has received over 170 million views online and has been featured in numerous publications such as The Daily Dot, the U.S. Sun, and CEO Blog Nation. He was awarded the 2021 Top Career Coach by Coach Foundation, and his clients, exciting VIPs from Hollywood, Variety Magazine, Reddit, Coinbase, NBC News, and more. With that, I'm pleased to welcome Braxton to the show. I'm so excited to have you on the show, and immediately my first question is, what is this Willy Wonka thing? But where did that come from?
The Willy Wonka thing, that was actually the brainchild of my team member I have. He kind of just said, Braxton, what you really are is the Willy Wonka of career growth, because you're just handing out golden tickets to people for their dream jobs. And I'm like, okay, like I can roll with that.
I'm like, is there chocolate or candy or something? I don't know what I was thinking, but that's awesome. And what we do is in alignment. This show is about being in the driver's seat for your career, and you are about putting people in control, having jobs that's on their terms. So tell us a little bit about what you currently do.
Yeah, Simone, thank you. What I do is really just that, help people find whatever it is they want to do for a living, whatever their dream is, on their own terms. And I find the way I go about that is helping people really uncover the barriers that they're experiencing in their careers. And a lot of times it's things that they're either frankly oblivious to or just not aware of. And so I help fill in those gaps just in their understanding how the job market works, how employers think. And when they kind of fill in all those gaps, their careers tend to take off pretty quickly.
Well, that sounds very exciting to me. Where did that come from? You know, that passion to embrace that work. Where did that come from for you?
Yeah, the inspiration for this career coaching company really has to do with my own personal experience in my career. So I'm a product of homeschooling. So I haven't set foot in a classroom since I was 11 years old. And so being someone that didn't have, and I don't try to say this negatively, but being someone that didn't have schooling to lean on as a crutch forced me to navigate my career purely based on merit, right? And so everything that I had to show employers of what I was capable of didn't come from the angle of education necessarily. It came from what I've been able to practice and do on my own time. And so that's kind of where the phrase "on your own terms" comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a homeschool kid. Stopped going to school when I was 11 years old. I homeschooled all the way through junior high and high school. Got out of high school and had the thought, I don't really know what it is I want to do for a living yet. And so going to college doesn't seem to make sense because I don't want to just go because that's what everyone else does. And so, you go to school to get a good job and just because that's what you're supposed to do. Like none of that didn't seem right with me. So I spent the first 5-ish years of my professional life kind of bouncing around and floundering around a lot of different jobs. And through that experience and through some side hustles, I realized what my passion was, what it was I wanted to do for a living. And again, still pursuing that on my own terms in my own time without waiting for the permission of an employer to let me come work for them to gain that experience. I did it on my own. And within a few years, it got me into a 600-person tech company that required a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience, that journey I took, made me realize that there's something kind of unique but repeatable to this that I believe is more effective than the whole notion of, going to school so you can get a good job. And so that's the inspiration behind the company, that we very much teach and coach people based on those principles, those things that I covered along my own personal journey.
Mm. Do you still find that there's pushback from an education standpoint?
So much. And this is one of the biggest things that I'm very vocal about, even as a function of this coaching company, which is that a lot of people tend to conflate the definition of education versus schooling. And so something that I always try to be vocal about is that I had a very fruitful, very valuable, very fulfilling education. I just didn't sit in the classroom for it.
Mm.
And so that's the biggest thing that I want to help people understand is, for those that are just entering their career or entering, their first big boy, big girl job, so to speak, and they're thinking about going to school uh, to learn their profession. It's, we're in the 21st century where information is abundantly available.
Mhm.
And I would argue that with a few exceptions, college doesn't really hold any exclusivity on knowledge at all. That knowledge can be attained somewhere else. So the trick is just to find that knowledge elsewhere in a way that's more efficient, more practical, and less costly and less time consuming. Put that into practice, develop your experience that way, and then you can see your career into the future by following that path.
I love that. Tell us how you got your confidence to tell that story, because I think many people have not your story exactly, but that perhaps a education deficit, and you have to be able to communicate it in that way where I'm listening and I keep listening and I want to collaborate with you. How did you build that confidence so that you can stand in your value, your worth, your truth?
That's a great question, Simone. I think that after navigating my career and landing all the jobs that I did before I started this business, it showed me like it wasn't just a fluke. I didn't get into that tech company and then wasn't ever successful after that. In fact, the next company I left that tech company for increased my salary by another 30 grand, and I was able to work from home. And so like it wasn't a fluke. And so going through that process and just having that experience made me realize that this is something the world needs to hear,
Mhm.
and I know it works. And so that's where the confidence comes from. And I do get a lot of pushback. I'm very fortunate in the following and the content that I produce. And there are people that come across my content, and have been called every name under the sun in terms of like just how clueless they think I am about this. And so I do get a lot of pushback, but I'm here for the people that genuinely want to improve their lives and improve their careers. And like the track record of our clients speaks for itself. So I went into this business and into this practice with that initial confidence of, okay, I know it worked for me. Let's show other people how it works. And now our clients are experiencing the same results, the same benefits. And now it's like, okay, it's not just Braxton telling his story anymore. Everyone else that has tried this method have been able to repeat it. And frankly, I've had clients that are way more successful in their own careers than I ever was in mine prior to this business. And it's wild to see just the type of results that people get.
Mm. Braxton, I'm curious, how do you layer diversity on top of it? Because you said this is repeatable, this worked for me, so I can get it to work for other people. But the workplace is riddled with biases.
Mm-hmm.
And so that enters the equation somehow. How do
Mm-hmm.
you deal with that in the work that you do?
Me being a very much a free range kid, I'm not
What
someone
does that
that
mean?
free range. So as a homeschool kid, I didn't have a lot of, I mean, obviously I had parents that raised me and taught me good principles and tried to do the best they could, right? But I didn't have a lot of rigid structure as a kid. And that sounds terrible, but it was actually a good thing because I learned to be independent and very self-directed because of that. When me being a homeschool kid, I use that term very loosely. I actually wasn't instructed by my parents at all. I did it all myself. I read textbooks myself. I did the quizzes myself. So I learned to be a very self-motivated person at a very young age. And that opened up a lot of opportunities for me early on. By the time I was 16, I was working a full-time job, working in a company where I was working alongside a bunch of other adults. And so at a younger age than most people, I learned to interact with adults
Mhm.
where most kids would have felt anxious or maybe a little nervous and being in rubbing shoulders with people in that capacity. And so there's a lot of that experience early in my life showed me a lot of things. And so coming from the diversity perspective, I would like to think that because of that experience, I am maybe a little bit more capable of recognizing potential opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I speak with people that come into things with biases, it's one thing to be able to tell them, this is my experience. Here's why I observed it worked for me. Here's why I have observed it's worked for other clients. My invitation to you would be to test it yourself and let's see if those biases are really true or if it's your own personal experience that's influencing your decision making. One of the things I coach people on a lot is all about mindset. I joke that I end up being more of a therapist with my clients than a coach, actually. And so one of the things I talk about is that demon in the back of our head that is always telling us these negative stories that we're telling ourselves. We all are, that's human condition. We are all subject to that. We all suffer from that, me included. And so a lot of what I coach people on and those biases and that diversity is helping people try and shed away those limiting beliefs so that it doesn't impact their decision making in their career. When the people that are able to do that and suspend their disbelief in all these lofty promises that I'm making are the ones that tend to be able to experience that rapid career growth.
Hmm. What do you say to the listeners, Braxton, when you say, let my merit speak for itself, where there are others who double down and do the work and without strategic relationships or conversations or building awareness around their capabilities, leadership brand, et cetera. What do you say to them when they question the merit versus education as a differentiator? Just curious.
Yeah. So one of the other items of pushback that I get, one of the debates I get on this topic is that whole philosophy of it's not about what you know, but who you know, right? I believe there's some truth to that. There's some merit to it, but people always say that in a negative sense, and I think it's actually positive. And what I mean by that is, even if it's true that it's all about who you know and not what you know, the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, it doesn't matter how you know someone. And again, we live in the information age. It's the 21st century. There's nothing precluding anyone from going on LinkedIn and reaching out and connecting with someone that is a valuable connection to make. And so, like, again, I tend to use my own personal experience in this example because I was the perceivably I was the awkward homeschool kid that no one wanted to be friends with because of all the stigmas and the stereotypes, which weren't true. Which is a whole other story. But so, like, me on paper, not having anything going for me, no education, no connections. I grew up in a small conservative town with like not a lot going on. There was nothing there that had anything going for me. So how does someone like that end up making the connections and finding the opportunity to, for example, end up working at a 600-person tech company? Those things didn't happen by accident. What I would my answer is being intentional with your ambitions and taking the ownership and the accountability of your actions instead of blaming external influences that you have no control over. If you can look internally and recognize your own capabilities and double down on that instead of blaming the world, I think you're going to have an easier time, and you'll be surprised at the results you get if you really embrace that.
Hmm. When did you realize you were in the driver's seat for your career?
The method that I teach in my coaching, I don't know if there was any single solitary moment where it was like a light bulb moment, but that journey I went through showed me a lot of things and taught me about how people can really improve their livelihood. But if I had to pick a moment, it was when I was working at the tech company and I had 3 different jobs there, 3 different roles there in that time. And that was when I started realizing like there's something to this because I'm now like I've been in the same room with A-list celebrities, very famous entrepreneurs as a result of me working at that tech company. And I've been able to shake their hand and make some of those connections as well. And again, none of it happened by accident. None of it was anything that was handed to me either. So yeah, but that was the moment I think is like working at that tech company and realized that journey, that method, this process that I kind of uncovered when it comes to career development got me here. And this is incredible. And that wasn't even the highlight of my career. Since that time, when I was working for other companies, I have been able to travel a lot for other businesses that I was working for. I got to fly and meet to various conferences and meet people that are very famous speakers, very famous athletes, all sorts of really interesting, amazing people. Just because I embrace this notion of betting on yourself, taking accountability and ownership of your ambition, and not letting external influences or those limiting world beliefs be the thing that holds you back.
Mm. Who wowed you as a celebrity?
Who wowed me? Oh man.
I have to ask.
Um,
It's not one of the questions usually on the podcast, but
oh my goodness. Um, I was at a conference and had the luxury or the bless. I don't know. I was spoiled. I got to meet Gary Vaynerchuk.
uh,
Um, and some, there he's tends to be polarizing a little bit. But I think anyone would agree that the man's very authentic, and that's what I admire about him. So I would say him. Just the conversation and the genuine time that he took to shake my hand and speak to me for a few minutes. That was the guy you see on social media is the same guy that I shook hands with. So
mm.
that would be probably be my answer.
Okay, okay, very exciting. How do you embrace risk in your career?
That's a I'm like, for me, I'm someone that where most people like are resistant to change, I almost chase it to the point where it's actually probably a character flaw of mine, actually. So one way that that has shown in my life is after getting married, my wife and I, we've been married 15 years now, and we've probably lived in as many places as years we've been married.
Wow.
Which, yeah, and so that number is starting to dwindle, and that ratio is dwindling down a little bit now because I've realized that how crazy I was. But so I was always looking for change. Me being a homeschooled kid, I think I had so many things that I could be doing, and I had the freedom to choose with my time what to do. And that was a habit that I carried into adulthood, and I didn't realize it at first. And so I would bounce around, and I'm always chasing change. And as part of that, risk is something that I'm not super averse to either. And so I think a lot of people talk about risk like it's dangerous, and it can be, but there's a difference between taking a risk and taking a gamble. And a lot of people conflate the definition of gambling with risk, I think. So I think the first question is if someone's, considering taking a risk of some sort, is to first ask themselves, is this really a risk? Is it calculated? Can you define some principles of what this risk is and what the implications are? Or is this just a gamble where you're throwing something against the wall and seeing if it sticks? There's a distinction there, and I think that's important to make. So how do I embrace risk? I think I do it all the time. What I've learned in my career and as a business owner now is risk doesn't have to be dangerous. It doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be big either. I think one of the biggest principles most entrepreneurs learn is that taking like failing fast and failing small, right? Take itty bitty little risks and learn from those instead of taking one big one and having to learn that and have that potentially derail your life or your business, if that
Mm,
makes sense.
mm. Yeah, all of this makes sense, Braxton. I was wondering around resources that have helped you to become who you are and stronger from a career ownership on your terms. What resources can you recommend to our audience that's been super helpful to you in your career?
Yeah. So the one of the ways earlier I talked about like learning my interests, exploring my interests, and then doing things to learn and understand what is I really want to do. And then putting those things into practice. So early on, I read every book I could on my profession of interest. I took every online course I could find that was of interest to learn this craft, to learn this skill set. Early in my career, YouTube was barely a thing, but videos were starting to pop on YouTube.
Mhm.
And so nowadays we have things like YouTube where people are freely giving away all sorts of information
Mhm.
about any topic. So the information is very accessible. And there's a lot of places you can find it, even on podcasts like this, right, Simone? So um, that would be like that's how I started. And so that's what I would suggest is what is your interest and what is your skill set that you want to develop, and find resources for that. So a few that I use specifically, udemy.com is a great online course platform. I've partnered with them as a coach now before. So highly recommend them just because they make really good information very, very accessible.
Mhm.
And it's packaged up in a way where it can actually be beneficial to people. So Udemy is one. there's a litany, like when I was a teenager, before I realized it was a business that I wanted to do, me not sure what I want to do as a teenager, I remember walking up and down, and see, this tells you what kind of a nerdy kid I was, but I would remember walking up and down the stacks in my local library because I had this itch to want to learn to do something, and I knew it wasn't like going and picking up another fiction book, another story to read. There was this itch that I had. And I would walk up and down all the stacks in the library trying to find a book that like sounded like something I'd be interested in. And at first I didn't understand it. And I couldn't figure out what this itch was that I wanted to scratch. And then I got married, got into my adult life and realized, oh, you want to be a business owner, you want to be an entrepreneur. That opened up that was the itch. So I guess what I'm saying is a lot of people don't like libraries, but I would encourage people to go just to their local library and walk up and down the stacks and see if there's topics or books there that would be of interest, because it's free to just take that book out and it's free to commit yourself to read it a little bit to see if this is an interest. All that's free. And the information that you can pick up in that book, again, there's no other institution or organization that is exclusive in giving you that information. So you might as well go to the library or go on Amazon and get a Kindle version of it for free or cheaper than you normally would sitting in a classroom getting the same information. And the beauty of that is you can digest and put the information into practice much more quickly.
My first job was at a library. And so I was one of those kids who knew the Dewey Decimal. I don't know how or where it came from. I remember taking an exam and passing it. And at 14 years old, I worked in the library, Ferguson Library in Stamford, Connecticut, and I was filing cards. I mean, and so I've always had a passion for walking around the library like you describe and just enjoy. I love books, so I have a nice library at home, but I do enjoy the libraries as well. And to the point about being an entrepreneur, some of the libraries have an entrepreneur in residence, so and it's free to use it. So there's so many services that you can in fact get from the library. I love that you highlighted that as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about the title of your book or potential book that embraces your career body of work. Tell us the title and why.
So the title, I'm still working on my book. And I'm sure my agent will appreciate the day when I finally give him a more complete proposal. But I'm playing with the title a little bit. So the biggest thing is making this journey that I took and this method that I uncovered, making it easy to repeat for people. And so right now, I think I maybe have changed the title of the book a few times since even you and I first connected. But the method that I teach is what I call the mapped method. So by the time you go through this method, you can anticipate your whole career being mapped. And what MAP stands for is mindset, ambition, positioning, prospecting, evaluate, and then determine. And so those are the 6 phases of this method that I teach people. And I know that was like just an earful just now, but those are the 6 phases of this method that I coach people on, because those are the 6 phases in career development and even in the job search that people really have to get clear on. And those are the gaps that I help people fill in. So
I love that. I love that. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, honestly. Tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you if they'd like to.
Yeah, I kind of joke that I'm a professional maniac. So there's a lot of things I seem to be doing at any given point. But if you were to go to braxtonwood.vip, all my socials are there, all my businesses are there, everything, all my activities are there, everything I'm doing is there, and you can connect with me that way.
Awesome. Well, Braxton, thanks so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
So thank you so much.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.